Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How we doing? Spectre here for another edition of Midnight Rider. Good to have you aboard on this evening, the 11th day now of March. On the broadcast tonight, we're going to cover a little bit about the old immune system. We're going to talk a little bit about ways to improve that and some of the things that the Mockingbird media will not tell you. The benefits of vitamin D, things of that nature, and give a little bit of an update also regarding the old COVID-19 stuff. I only got a couple, 2-3 articles on the broadcast here this evening, and it's probably going to take the better part of an hour to get through those, along with some of the studies and that, links embedded within the articles and so forth. So we'll see you back here momentarily on the other side. Warning. These social media platforms may be hazardous to your health. Censorship kills. Pain coming. This has been a PSA by Breaking Spectre. Alright, welcome back everybody. Spectre here again. Like I said on the broadcast tonight, we're going to talk a little bit about your health, your immune system, vitamin D, the propaganda especially that has come out against a lot of some effective means to combat what we have had to deal with now for the better part of a year. Stuff that obviously the Mockingbird media will not tell you, and of course is stuff that the old big tech folks and that would absolutely love to censor. So that's exactly what we're going to get into here tonight, and it's going to be chock full of information, like I said, and man, if I if I had time to go through every single article that I had in my troves here over the last year, we'd be here for weeks. So it's tough to pare this down, unfortunately, and I think what I'll probably do, perhaps over the course of a couple broadcasts here, I'll use this as kind of a launch pad, if you will, to go on a series of things, because this COVID business is kind of taken on a life of its own, right? You can look at it from an economic standpoint. You can look at it from a standpoint of purely just the vaccine side of things. You can look at it from the effects of lockdowns. You can look at it from the standpoint of masking and everything else. And each one of those kind of becomes their own entity underneath the whole COVID umbrella. That being said, perhaps I'll get into some of those here in the subsequent broadcast. But for tonight, this is what we're going to cover. Interesting article out of the Daily Bell says COVID propaganda roundup. Vitamin D doesn't support the immune system? That's kind of an interesting question because, well, if you go back through history here, probably the last time that there was any sort of pandemic, anybody who can just, use an old internet search engine can probably quickly find that back in the 40s, 50s, whenever it was here in the United States, one of the things that happened was this. The patients net used to get wheeled out of the hospitals, and for one simple reason, to get sunlight. Why is sunlight important? Well, obviously it has a little bit to do with vitamin D and how that works inside our respective bodies. And so vitamin D obviously is quite important to your immune health. There's plenty of studies you guys can go find as well. So getting into the article says the latest updates on the new normal, chronicling the lies, distortions, and abuses by the ruling class. Let's see. New York mayor issues double mask decree under color of law. On February 22nd, New York Mayor Bill de Blasio issued a new decree via the corporate media to New York residents. Through June, keep doing exactly what you are doing, not just wear a mask, wear two. social distancing, get tested monthly. If you do have a case in your home, have the person safely separate. Because that has worked so well before, and, if at first you don't succeed, try again, right? Double down on it. Current authoritarian leadership in the vein of Bill de Blasio under direction of the CDC cites research that has suggested that when a person double masks, wearing a polypropylene surgical mask with a cloth mask on top, and the people around them did the same, the risk of transmitting the virus falls more than 95%. Show me the study that says anything close to that. Please, I'll wait for it. Not breathing. ABC News will be reporting next month at this rate cuts the risk of transmission by 100%. And I think ultimately that's their goal, right? I mean, geez, all you have to do is look at the Georgia Guidestones to figure out what their playbook is, right? I mean, just let's eliminate about 90% of the population of the earth. It'd be all the better. And just imagine all the rejoicing by the Mockingbird media and the big tech folks, right? That's their true goal. For any New Yorkers who maintain the delusional narrative that the social engineers initially pushed, which promised a return to normalcy following the vaccines, let New York Health Commissioner Dave Chokshi put such hopes to rest. Says we now have the valuable new weapon in our arsenal, the vaccine. But we have to think about it as something that is an additional layer of protection, and that includes mask wearing. Now, wait a minute. Let's scroll back in time here, right? Last year, this time, maybe we could have been fooled, and the whole narrative about, we have to flatten the curve and everything else, and then the continued moving of the goalposts, and, well, we can't do anything until the vaccines are in place. Now, wait a minute. You get a vaccine and you still have to wear a mask? But why? So the Canadian Public Health Group issues 14-day solitary confinement guidelines for children who test positive for COVID. If the social engineers have their way, Guantanamo Bay tactics for mentally breaking prisoners are coming to your neighborhood. Only this time the targets are your children, not accused terrorists. Canadian region of Peel, outside of Toronto, now is suggesting the parents of children who test positive for COVID isolate them alone in a separate room of the house away from other family members for 14 days. Even kindergartners, even if they have no symptoms. Can you say child abuse? In any case, here's the graphic that they put forth. What to do if your child is dismissed from school or childcare. Child must self-isolate, which means, in this string of stuff, any other children who live at the same address, more stuff there, and adults living at the same address, more stuff there. Nice little graphic they decided to come up with. So what exactly does self-isolating young children mean? Well, the Peel region lays out the gritty operational details. Stay in a separate bedroom. Eat in a separate room apart from others, use a separate bathroom, if possible, and if the child must leave their room, they should wear a mask and stay 2 meters away from others. In your own home, mind you, folks. Your family. Never mind that children, especially ones barely old enough to tie their shoes, require physical touch for normal development. Developmental delay is often seen in children receiving inadequate or inappropriate sensory stimulation. For example, orphaned infants exposed to the bleakest of conditions in Eastern European institutions exhibited impaired growth and cognitive development, as well as an elevated incidence of serious infections and attachment disorders. And that was out of the Pediatrics and Child Health. Alas, it seems that we're all institutionalized Eastern Europeans now, fully ensconced by the Iron Curtain. Infectious disease physician Dr. Martha Fulford sums up what, in a decent world, would be the standard reaction to what amounts to proposed crimes against children. This is shocking. Where have we heard that term, crimes against children, before? Mainstream media denies science, pushes false claims that zinc, vitamin C, and vitamin D don't support immune function. Oh boy. I wonder if they've scrubbed the old archives on the government side of every single study that says otherwise. But, the media just tells us this and we're just supposed to eat it up, right? The corporate press insists at nearly every turn that it supports the science. How ironic, then, that they now push dangerous and false claims that arguably the best studied natural supplements to fight coronavirus infections. Despite their reputation for boosting the powers of your immune system, a new study reports that vitamin C and zinc supplements don't help COVID-19 patients recover from their illness. That out of U.S. News. Well, wait a minute. Didn't we have a similar study try and paint the same case with hydroxychloroquine and then, oh, wait a minute, somebody got elected and sworn into office on the 20th and then all of a sudden they had to recant that, didn't they? I wonder what changed. So vitamin D, vitamin C, and zinc do, in fact, each support immune function, including critically normalizing the inflammatory response to prevent the deadly cytokine storm phenomenon that is the biggest cause of death in hospitalized COVID patients. The science is quite clear, and the evidence is available to anyone who looks, at least until it's scrubbed from the web. Hence why we are broadcasting this and archiving it along the way. The fundamental issue at hand is that multinational pharmaceutical corporations can't patent, bottle, and sell zinc, vitamin D, or vitamin C at a 10,000% markup, like they do with the drugs that they develop themselves, such as untested mRNA vaccines with no long-term safety studies. And then Pfizer and Moderna vaccines do not meet any conventional definition of the term vaccine and associated deceptive marketing tactics. And that's exactly what it is. They're trying to sell you a product. Just as I was explaining to somebody here today, that is exactly what we're seeing here. And don't think for a second that your quote-unquote doctor is not getting kickbacks behind the scenes from some rep who's pushing the vials and the needles and that behind the scenes. And, at your expense of not knowing, long-term health effects, they get a good little steak dinner or golf trip or whatever. Just a nice little vacation for pushing a jab. But hey, for clarification purposes, when the AP describes China's humble, traditionally made shots, they are referencing the fact that the Moderna and Pfizer's vaccines, using quotes, which utilize untested new mRNA technology, are not actually vaccines according to any conventional definition of the term. So, how do the new mRNA gene therapies work? Per Pfizer's public relations page, unlike a traditional vaccine that uses inactivated dead or portions of actual virus to spur an immune response, mRNA delivers a message to your body's cells via a lipid nanoparticle envelope that instructs the cells to generate the spike protein found on the surface of a coronavirus that initiates infection. Interestingly, when Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci book guest spots on corporate media, they incessantly refer to the vaccine, the miraculous vaccine, the importance of vaccines, etc. However, and the Gates Foundation bankrolled Moderna's 2018 SEC filing, they offer a clearer, more legally precise explanation of their work, correctly referring to them therein as gene therapies and transformative medicine. See the little wordplay they do there? Currently, mRNA is considered a gene therapy product by the FDA. We are creating a new category of transformative medicines based on messenger RNA, or mRNA, to improve the lives of patients. From the beginning, we designed our strategy and operations to realize the full potential value and impact of mRNA over a long time horizon across a broad array of human diseases. And that's out of Moderna's SEC filing. Oh, and don't worry, we're going to cover that here, so stay tuned. You don't need an advanced degree in marketing to understand the lawyerly semantics game at play. Vaccine sounds better researched and less Frankensteinian than experimental gene therapy with no long-term safety studies. This is the same manipulation tactic that Bill Gates employs with his relentless sweater vest wearing, foppish hand gestures, and nerdy vocal intonations during cable news interviews. The idea is to get the target, you and your family, as comfortable as possible with your new role as medical test subjects. Wait a minute. Didn't the Nuremberg Code say something about that? Just a thought. Who wouldn't trust the friendly neighborhood Mr. Rogers-style nerd to shoot straight? You wouldn't hit a man with glasses, would you? So in any case, again, this article chock full of information here. Let me hit some of the highlights out of that. The first of which is, here's that brochure and that out of Canada, what they're actually pushing. Again, highlighting the child and caregiver can isolate together, which means as much as possible stay separate from others, including using a separate bathroom and eating meals apart from others in home. Wear a mask and stay 2 meters apart from others as much as possible. It is strongly recommended to follow the direction for COVID-19 testing in your letter. Again, this is what is being used in Canada. Now over to the other link that was in the article is out of ncbi.nlm.nih.gov. We get COVID-19's emerging rapidly evolving situation. This is the zinc as a gatekeeper of immune function. Let me briefly read the abstract out of this. It says, after the discovery of zinc deficiency in the 1960s, it soon became clear that zinc is essential for the function of the immune system. So here we are, 50 years later, and apparently the science was wrong back then, right? Zinc ions are involved in regulating intracellular signaling pathways in innate and adaptive immune cells. Zinc homeostasis is largely controlled via the expression and action of zinc importers, ZIP 1 to 14, zinc exporters, ZNT 1 to 10, and zinc binding proteins. Anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties of zinc have long been documented. However, underlying mechanisms are still not entirely clear. Here we report molecular mechanisms underlying the development of a pro-homeostasis and disease development. Consequently, the benefits of zinc supplementation for a malfunctioning immune system become clear. This article will focus on underlying mechanisms responsible for the regulation of cellular signaling by alterations in zinc homeostasis. Effects of fast zinc flux, intermediate zinc waves, and late homeostatic zinc signals will be discriminated. Description of zinc homeostasis-related effects on the activation of key signaling molecules, as well as in epigenetic modifications, are included to emphasize the role of zinc as a gatekeeper of immune function. And so, again, I'll drop the link out here once I get through this, and you guys can check these all out as well. The next one highlighted is out of BMC here. Inflammation regeneration, how COVID-19 induces cytokine storm with high mortality. Again, I'll just briefly read the abstract out of this. It says a newly emerging coronavirus disease, 2019, caused by severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, was first reported in Wuhan, China, but has rapidly spread all over the world. Some COVID-19 patients encounter a severe symptom of acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, with high mortality. This high severity is dependent on a cytokine storm, which most likely induced by the interleukin-6 IL-6 amplifier, which is hyperactivation machinery that regulates the nuclear factor kappa B, all that good stuff. Pathway and stimulated by the simultaneous activation of IL-6 signal transducer and activator of transcription 3, STAT3, and NFKB signaling is non-immune cells, including alveolar epithelial cells and endothelial cells. We hypothesize that IL-6 STAT3 signaling is a promising therapeutic target for the cytokine storm in COVID-19 because IL-6 is a major STAT3 stimulator, particularly during inflammation. We herein review the pathogenic mechanism and potential therapeutic targets of ARDS in COVID-19 patients. And of course, not to be outdone, then we get to this nice little guy out of the old SEC, which, of course, every single one of these guys has probably got a file. This is, interestingly enough, put into place clear back on November 9th of 2018 for Moderna. Wait a minute. When did this come about again? 2019 was October 2019 is when they had the exercise, right? And then 2020 is when we had the outbreak, but in 2018 they already submitted the SEC filings, registration number 333, by the way. Oh, and so let's check this out. Just a quick little search here. We'll plug in gene therapy. How many times throughout this SEC filing does that show up exactly? Oh, just 23 times. So currently, mRNA is considered a gene therapy product by the FDA. Unlike certain gene therapies that irreversibly alter cell DNA and could act as a source of side effects, mRNA-based medicines are designed to not irreversibly change cell DNA. However, side effects observed in gene therapy could negatively impact the perception of mRNA medicines despite the differences in mechanism. In addition, because no product in which mRNA is the primary active ingredient has been approved, the regulatory pathway for approval is uncertain. The number and design of the clinical and preclinical studies required for the approval of these types of medicines have not been established, may be different from those required for gene therapy products, or may require safety testing like gene therapy products. Moreover, the length of time necessary to complete clinical trials and to submit an application for marketing approval for a final decision by a regulatory authority varies significantly from one pharmaceutical product to the next, and may be difficult to predict. So there you go. That, again, if you just do a simple word search in the actual SEC filing, let's see, how many times does it mention vaccine in here? Let's take a peek. Oh, about 600 times, I guess. So, again, I guess they just interchange those terminologies, right? Gene therapy, vaccine, it's all the same, right? Wrong. So, nonetheless, like I said, you guys can check that out. You can find the links within the actual article. You guys got that out in chat there, and away we go. All right, that being said, let's flash over to another article that literally just came through just before broadcast here. And so the question is, what are your rights if you're actually immune to this thing? Do you have any at this point? So the American Institute for Economic Research had this as the rights of the naturally immune. There is an important issue that, in the midst of all the talk of vaccines, has not gotten nearly the attention it deserves. The civil rights of those who have already developed natural immunity to the SARS-CoV-2, the virus that is said to cause COVID. Yesterday, I got the results of the test I took to detect whether I had developed a T-cell response to the virus. Like the antibody test I took almost 2 months ago, it was positive. These two things would appear to demonstrate that for all intents and purposes, my body knew exactly what to do with the virus, and that it probably has the equipment to dispose of it again, were it, or one of its cousins, to revisit me in the near to medium term. And even if one or another related strain were to visit me in the future, studies suggest strongly that the attack would be considerably less virulent than the one I overcame without excessive trouble in December. In a halfway rational world, what to do going forward in regard to getting a vaccine for the SARS-CoV-2 virus would be something I discuss with my doctor in the discreet quarters of the examination room. Were it to be offered, I would politely refuse it, and he, seeing the evidence in my file, would raise no objection. And since the danger to me in the future from the virus is minuscule, and the science has clearly borne out what Fauci and Maria van Kerkhove of the World Health Organization flatly said was true before someone upstairs got to them, that asymptomatic transmission of respiratory diseases of this type is virtually non-existent, I'd be free to live my life as I pleased without a mask and with complete freedom of movement. But instead of this, I am facing enormous pressure to get a vaccine in order to recover my basic rights as a citizen. And even then, those in charge are saying I will still have to run around with a completely useless, breath-robbing, and personality-canceling mask on my face. And all this for a disease that, even before the introduction of vaccines, gave those infected by it a roughly 99.75 or 997.5 out of 1,000 chance of survival? The civil authorities have decided, in effect, that fully indemnified pharmaceutical companies, whose pasts are obscenely littered with fraud and the calculated creation of crises in order to up revenues on their products, OxyContin anyone, have the de facto right to force me to take an experimental vaccine that, in the very, very best of circumstances, will only match what my apparently well-functioning body has already given me without any side effects. And this, while straight out telling me that even if I submit to their government-coerced medical experiment, I will probably still not get my full constitutional rights back. This is an important issue that needs to be addressed much more vigorously than has been the case up until now. And I would wholeheartedly agree. Not only that, but I sincerely believe that we are going to have to push the Nuremberg Code stuff very, very heavily. These folks know exactly what they are doing, the fraud that they are pushing, the no need to have any of this bullshit on us. If you have a well-functioning immune system, have the ability to take anything that I just described, vitamin C, D, or whatever concoction you so desire, who are they to tell us that we don't have the ability to function in society? They don't. They have no authority. Again, know your rights, number one. Number two, learn to use I do not consent. And number three, as I've spoken of many a times before, we are going to have to get used to having to work around and through these folks, period. We're going to have to develop our own economies without these folks. These folks do not have our interests in mind at all. All right, well, last but not least for tonight, again, this one's going to be a little bit of a long read here. So some COVID-19 facts, March 2021 updates out of South Front here. And this harkens over to SWPRS, a Swiss version of this where they track this stuff. The world continues to live in the conditions of the permanent media hysteria over the COVID-19 outbreak, with some sources even suggesting that a second wave of the spread of coronavirus is expected in the autumn. At the same time, more and more facts appear suggesting that the media hysteria over the current situation is not based on facts or even artificially created. While the coronavirus is an important factor in influencing the situation around the world, the threat of the outbreak seems to be significantly overestimated. The January 2021 report can be found here, July 2020 report found here, June 2020 report found here, etc., etc. So apparently the guys in Switzerland have been keeping on us. What about a third wave? Well, here's the graphical in regards to that. The deaths per 1,000 persons, and this, I guess, is probably looking at the outbreak that took place back in 1918-1919 and what happened there. That's kind of a point of reference. It says, will there be a third coronavirus wave in March 2021? Well, SPR was one of the first research groups in the world to predict, already in August of 2020, a second, stronger coronavirus wave in much of Europe and the U.S. The rationale was simple. The seasonality of the coronavirus was well known. The antibody seroprevalence was still very low, even in large parts of Sweden. Authorities relied on mostly useless measures, masks, and they ignored or suppressed highly effective early and prophylactic treatment options. Furthermore, most flu pandemics of the 20th century consisted of 2 or 3 waves, while the 1889 pandemic, suspected to have been caused by a coronavirus, extended over 5 years. Nevertheless, many skeptics and many authorities were surprised by the second wave, the former because they falsely believed in herd immunity, the latter because they falsely believed in ineffective measures, masks, contact tracing, social distancing, etc. So what about a third coronavirus wave in March 2021? Many skeptics again deny it, while many authorities predict or fear it, but for the wrong reasons, namely new virus variants. Yes, new variants have been displacing old variants, but even in places where new variants dominate, they haven't changed the trajectory of the local epidemic. irrespective of the measures in place. Nevertheless, a third wave in March is entirely possible, but for the very same reason as described above, the coronavirus seasons last until March-April. Antibody seroprevalence is still quite low in many places, below 10% in Germany, and authorities still rely on mostly useless measures. Furthermore, some of the existing vaccines appear to be somewhat less effective against some of the new variants, notably the South African and the Brazilian variants. And the mass vaccination campaigns themselves appear to have driven the spread of the coronavirus into high-risk groups in several countries, leading to an additional increase in COVID deaths. The obvious solution to preempt a potential third wave is ivermectin-based early and prophylactic treatment. But, at least in Western Europe and the US, authorities will try to suppress this approach and will insist on their devastating lockdown and late treatment strategy. So, this graph says why the flu has disappeared. Number of specimens positive for influenza by subtype. And I know this is a little bit hard to read, but they're laying out the lineage not determined, Victoria lineage, Yamagata. So apparently these are all different studies or looks at the data, what have you. And of course, this kind of depicts that there out of the World Health Organization FluNet. What about a third wave? Well, here we go again, highlighting the same thing there. Let's see. Looks like this part repeats. Let's scroll through that. Somewhat less effective. Obvious solution, preempt third wave early. Okay, so the vaccine passport agenda. Apparently that part repeated in the article here. On the strategic implications of the coronavirus pandemic. Overall, medical aspects are only the operational level of the coronavirus pandemic. In countries where the median age of COVID deaths is above 80 years, the public health impact of the pandemic will be quite limited and primarily related to serious cases of long COVID. Indeed, even the World Health Organization recently acknowledged that the coronavirus pandemic wasn't necessarily the big one. The strategic level of the coronavirus pandemic, in contrast, is the one that NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden warned of already in March 2020. The temporary pandemic may be used for a permanent expansion of global population surveillance and control. Since Snowden's warning, both Apple and Google have inserted a Bluetooth-based contact tracing interface, entirely useless for pandemic control, into the operating systems of 3 billion mobile phones. Moreover, in a March 2020 TED Talk interview, billionaire vaccine investor Bill Gates already predicted, or rather announced, that eventually what we'll have to have is certificate of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, and so eventually there will be this digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening up. The latter, apodictic sentence was later edited out by the TED Talk producers, but a full audio version of the talk remained available, and so the sentence could be inserted back in. And we'll highlight that in the video below. Obviously, the digital immunity proof proclaimed by Bill Gates is exactly what many countries, including Sweden, intend to introduce in the near future. Several governments intend to require vaccine passports even for domestic activities, thus making them essentially mandatory. Besides Bill Gates, another major promoter of vaccine passports is former British Prime Minister Tony Blair, whose Institute for Global Change received money from, guess who? The Gates Foundation. Such vaccine passports are, moreover, a key component of the Biometric ID 2020 project run by the Digital Identity Alliance, which was founded by, Bill Gates again, via Microsoft, and Vaccine Alliance Gavi, and the Rockefeller Foundation, and which is itself linked to the Known Traveler program, initiated by the World Economic Forum and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. All the best players in the world there, folks. The idea of using a pandemic to impose tighter top-down control, modeled after China, was first described in a 2010 Rockefeller Foundation report, the so-called lockstep scenario. Of note, The Gates Foundation and the World Economic Forum also sponsored the notorious Event 201, Coronavirus Pandemic Stimulation, held in October 2019 in New York, about 1 month after the likely emergence of the new coronavirus, but about 2 months before the public first learned of it. The Gates Foundation is also sponsoring Pentagon biodefense contractor EcoHealth Alliance, which performed genetic coronavirus research together with the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, one may also wonder why many media outlets, quite a few of which receive money from the Gates Foundation, have exaggerated the risk of the new coronavirus so much that large parts of the public now overestimate its lethality by a factor of 100. From a medical perspective, vaccine passports are neither necessary nor useful to end the coronavirus pandemic. Similar to influenza, those who want to get experimental vaccine protection can do so any time. But also similar to influenza, a vaccine may not protect against new virus variants. For these and other reasons, Dutch digital security and privacy professor J.H. Hopman called COVID vaccine passports useless and an utter waste of time and effort. But Bill Gates and his powerful friends seem to think otherwise. And here it says, see also the crazy and evil Bill Gates surprised by pandemic conspiracies. That out of Reuters, January of this year. So let's take a quick listen to this. This is the deleted portion of the TEDx that was removed.
Eventually, what we'll have to have is certificates of who's a recovered person, who's a vaccinated person, because you don't want people moving around the world where you'll have some countries that won't have it under control. Sadly, you don't want to completely block off the ability for those, people to go there and come back and move around. So eventually there will be sort of this digital immunity proof that will help facilitate the global reopening up.
You wouldn't suppose that people would just edit stuff out or chop up audio and video just to, conveniently leave some facts out or shape a narrative now, would we? Nah, that can't possibly happen. And so here we see Bill Gates demanding digital immunity proof in March 2020. And again, you can see the full talk right there in the TEDx. I'll go ahead and drop the link out there for you guys now so you guys can have reference to that. This thing is going to be chocked full of information that you'll want to have at your fingertips. I'll show you here momentarily. It says, why has the flu disappeared since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic? And that's a good question. Every one of us should be going back to our respective health departments in our counties and saying, show me where our health data is for the flu. Where did it go? And I might even say, even for the CDC or even at your state level, where did it go exactly? And the thing that I always highlight as I talk to people out and about is why are our local places where we pick up our pharmaceuticals still promoting flu vaccines? Why? What's the point? In any case, in 2020, after the global coronavirus pandemic began, influenza viruses mysteriously disappeared from global circulation. See WHO FluNet chart above. Some skeptics suspected that influenza was simply reclassified as COVID, while many journos and fact-checkers claimed influenza was suppressed by face masks and lockdowns. Totally bogus. But influenza has not been reclassified as COVID, and influenza viruses have disappeared even in countries without face masks and lockdowns. And again, they reference Sweden here. While they did not disappear during previous flu epidemics and pandemics, despite face masks, school closures, and other measures. For instance, Japan, despite its widespread use of face masks, experienced a strong influenza epidemic in early 2019, just 1 year before the coronavirus pandemic began. Indeed, numerous studies have shown that face masks simply aren't effective against flu transmission. Instead, flu viruses have been displaced by the more infectious novel coronavirus. This displacement effect is well known from previous flu pandemics. The 1918 flu virus was displaced by the 1957 flu virus, which in turn was displaced by the 1968 flu virus. The 2009 swine flu virus temporarily displaced previous flu viruses, but eventually couldn't assert itself. And even during the current coronavirus pandemic, more transmissible virus strains have repeatedly displaced previous coronavirus strains, often within weeks, despite lockdowns. So again, how effective are these lockdowns? Not very. The last coronavirus pandemic is thought to have occurred in the 1890s, the Russian flu, which is why a coronavirus displacing influenza viruses was not seen for more than a century. It is well known, however, that influenza vaccinations do not reduce the overall incidence of influenza-like illnesses, as influenza viruses simply get replaced by other respiratory viruses, including coronaviruses. But why do countries with little or no COVID, most of them are islands, also have no influenza? Because they close their borders early. If the coronavirus doesn't get in, influenza viruses, which normally oscillate between the northern and southern hemispheres, won't get in either. An interesting and open question is whether the novel coronavirus might permanently suppress some or all of the existing influenza virus strains. This might, at last, be a positive development. So here's another graph, competition between various respiratory viruses, temporal patterns of seasonal respiratory viral infections in Glasgow. Red is the rhinoviruses, orange and yellow are the influenza viruses, and light green are the coronaviruses. So, pretty chart nonetheless. The 2009 swine flu virus almost displacing other flu viruses. There we see that graphically. Sweden, no lockdown, no face masks, no influenza. Chart of that. Timeline of pandemic influenza viruses. Here we see 1918, 50 to 100 million fatalities. 1957 was the H2N2, 1.1 million fatalities. 1968, the H3N2, about 1 million fatalities. 1977, the H1N1, age restricted to less than 25 years with mild disease. And of course, the latest one that we had, the H1N1 pandemic, about 284,000 fatalities. So, interesting thread follow through here. I'm probably not going to hit every single one of these, but this highlights what happened in China as this has progressed. It says, I have a new account, please go follow. Truth About China account says it's New Year's Eve in China. This is how some lockdown communities in northeast China are celebrating tonight. The word jiayu, you hear literally, means add oil. It is often used to show encouragement to stay strong in the face of adversity. And off to the next one. Says a Shanghai fruit shop owner refused to allow his shop to be disinfected. The local government authorities decided the best response was to destroy the entire shop's inventory of fresh produce. So we'll flash forward into a couple more of these. There's a whole string of these in this particular article. Mandatory coronavirus testing has begun in Hong Kong. Their strategy is to ambush neighborhoods without warning and force everyone inside to take a test. This was January 28th.
見到警方咧喺錦屏街呢度咧係奔跑緊，亦都係劃封緊膠帶。你收下啊！哎呀！
And and off to the next. Unannounced mandatory testing continues in Hong Kong. Locals have coined these events ambush lockdowns. The man is saying this area has been sealed off. Residents are required to take a test. Staff will come and knock on your door. This as of February 6th. And maybe one more says this is an excellent overview of the ongoing lockdown situation in northeast China. It also confirms several of the videos I tweeted over the past 3 weeks. This from February 4th.
A child is standing at the entrance of a neighborhood under lockdown crying, "I want to go home. I really want to go home. I just want to take some rest." Under harsh lockdown measures in many Chinese cities, some people are unable to return home, and some have been trapped at home, almost starved to death. A video from last week on January 29 went viral online. It shows a desperate father scolding police officers after he and his family were put under lockdown for a dozen days in Suihua City of northeast China. He says they have no food at all and his child is starving. But the police stopped him from going out for shopping. They did not seem to show much sympathy. Many are unable to deal with the draconian lockdown measures and the psychological pressure that comes with them. A video from last week on the 28th appears to show a resident from Suihua City jumping off a high-rise building. The person died instantly. This is the third suicide incident in the city within 8 days. Days before, on January 21st, a man committed suicide by hanging himself, and another resident jumped off a high-rise building and died. Strict control measures have been implemented in the city since January 20th. A similar situation also occurred in Tonghua City, also in northeast China. In another northeast province, Jilin, authorities suddenly announced the lockdown on January 20th. They require all neighborhoods to be shut, and soon they put seals on the doors of every household. Some of the doors are even welded. As a result, hundreds of thousands of people are running out of food. Many are calling for help online. On January 25th, a woman in the city jumped from the 10th floor. Netizens lamented that the number of deaths and injuries due to the lockdown far exceeds the number of deaths from the latest coronavirus. In addition to locking down households and cities, authorities also show their prevention efforts by forcing people to wear masks. A woman refused to wear a face mask on the street. Several policemen pushed her away with her hands tied behind her back. Another woman was treated the same way. She says her hands are injured.
Crazy. And that's just a small snippet of things to come here, even on this side of the world, folks. Thousands of isolation units, aka jail cells, have been built in Hebei province, with 2,600 in Jingtai city alone. Anyone who may have had contact with a confirmed case is brought to these quarantine facilities at their own expense, where they will live for up to 21 days. And again, there's a whole bunch more of these, what's going on worldwide with these lockdowns and everything else. Let me scroll all the way to the bottom here, because there is some more good information down here I want you guys to see. And like I said, there's a whole string here. You guys can check each of those out if you wish. Still scrolling. Alright, here we go. Alright, so the latest SPR COVID updates. Lots of good links down here. General, what about a third wave? Why the flu has disappeared? Lockdowns in China in 2021. Coronavirus mutations update. A lot of good information from January to present. Regarding masks, Danish mask study, no benefit. On the suppressed Danish mask study from October of last year. World Health Organization mask study seriously flawed from September of last year. In terms of vaccines, the vaccine passport agenda from February of this year. COVID RNA vaccines, more than 1,000 deaths, February 2021. Can COVID vaccinations drive COVID deaths? Vaccines, successes and controversies, December of last year. In terms of early treatment, the fight against ivermectin has begun. and much the same campaign as what we saw with hydroxychloroquine last year, and later had to recant after a certain somebody was sworn in after January 20th. Ivermectin, World Health Organization review indicates effectiveness, why ivermectin works, and where to buy it. Remdesivir, an epidemic failure, the fight against HCQ from December of last year. And country profiles, you can go into Singapore, Switzerland, Germany, Belgium, Sweden, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Africa and Latin America, Belarus, Italy, Nembro, Italy, and some others thrown in for good measure, other facts and updates and that dating back to about June of last year. So, again, I'll drop the link out there one more time in case you're late joining, just so you have this. Again, there's a wealth of information in here. I would encourage you guys to check it out. Use that in your arsenal of stuff as you have discussions with folks out on the street in your daily lives, things to share, that sort of thing. I'm going to have a lot more to say about this, obviously. Again, as I started off the broadcast here tonight, talking about this, there's so many different factions and different ways you can parse this, whether you look at it in terms of vaccines, whether you look at it in terms of remedies and that are more safe and probably more effective, with studies and that support them. If you look at it in terms of masks or lockdowns and things of that nature, and the effects of the lockdowns, what do they do to a society as a result? I've got Boku articles on every single one of them, literally. So we'll probably touch upon that in some subsequent broadcasts. But for tonight, I think that's where we'll leave it. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. Thank you if you're joining on the YouTube side. Twitch is up here tonight, DLive as well. And of course, our friends over on the Tiger Network as well. So appreciate you guys tuning in as always. And we'll see you back here shortly on the next one. Take care. God bless everybody.